What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Chuds BBQ. My name is Bradley Robinson, and today is episode 1 of the Reverse Flow Smoker Build Series. Coming up! If you've been watching my channel for a while now, you know I've been welding for the last 7-8 years or so. And on this channel, I've built a bunch of stuff like a mini Chud box, tortilla press, a live fire griddle, a giant Chud table. And of course, my very first video on this channel was how to build an offset smoker. And I get questions all the time about who taught me how to weld, what kind of gear do I use, what welder do I recommend for the beginner, and is building a smoker even that approachable for an average person? And in every welding video I've done on the channel, it's more of a watch me build a pit as opposed to how to build a pit. You know, I gloss over all the major details, never talking about the gear or really showing the tips and techniques that I've picked up along the years when it comes to welding. So over the next several videos, I have no idea how long this is going to take, but I'm going to go over every little detail and every step of the process for how someone like me, a welder with zero training in a very humble welding shop garage, goes about building an offset smoker. But not just any offset smoker, I'm going to build a reverse flow. And that's because one of the main questions I get on the channel and during live chats is my thoughts on traditional flow versus reverse flow. And my answer is always the same. I've never cooked on a reverse flow pit, I've never had one, and I've never built one. So I figured it's time to build one. So in this video, episode 1 of the build series, I'm going to answer all the questions, starting with where did I learn how to weld? And really, it all starts with this pit behind me that you see me cooking on in every video for the last 3 years. The year was 2014, 2015. I was heavy into barbecue. I just started working at Friedman's here in Austin with Evan Leroy, and I really wanted a quality smoker for the backyard, but I could not afford one. The only things available at that time were the cheap Home Depot pits or some random weld that you're going to find on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or something like that. And any of the nicer pits made by local welders were far out of my price range. So I decided, hey, how hard could it be to actually build one myself? And long story short, over the course of a year, I started watching a whole bunch of YouTube videos and reading blogs and watching smoker building videos and really just trying to teach myself as much about welding as I possibly could. And all the while, I was really trying to design the perfect backyard pit for my budget, which was as cheap as possible. And this is basically what I came up with. This is a 150-gallon propane tank that I lobbed about 30 inches off of this side and put it over here to make the firebox. One tank to get both chambers. Went to a local metal shop, got some plate steel, fabricated the end with the door and the collector, built the frame out of 1-inch tube, and then went to the pipe shop and got a 6-inch pipe. And then all that was left was to borrow a friend's welder and angle grinder and just knock it out. And to my surprise, it is still holding strong to this day. My first weld is like right there. Looks terrible, but it's still holding. And once I built the first pit, I was hooked. It was a lot of fun. I mean, it's really rewarding to build something that heavy duty that you can then cook food on. So I bought my own welder, my own angle grinder, and I started knocking out all sorts of pits. You can see the graveyard behind me of various builds over the years, mostly mini Chud boxes, and one cute, tiny little smoker. So adorable. And over the years now, I've sold hundreds of pits and cookers, whether that's the Chud box or the Chud press, both on sale right now for pre-order, by the way. Head to chudsbbq.com for more info on that. Then there's the table, the chimney, and of course, offsets. But even after all that, my welding setup has not improved much. Although I have learned when to outsource to people with like laser cutters and water jets and bending machines and stuff to make life a little bit easier, but we'll get to that down the road. But the main reason I'm telling you all this is because you don't need a whole bunch of fancy equipment to build a smoker for yourself. The first 100 or so smokers was with one angle grinder for about 80 bucks and a $500 welder that I got on Amazon. So really to get into the hobby of pit building is not as expensive as you may think. But speaking of which, right now I want to go over all the tools that I'm going to be using and just talk about all the things that I wish I knew going into that pit build to arm you with the knowledge that you will need if you're going to build yourself a smoker. So to kick things off, let's start with the welder itself. This is a Miller 211 MIG welder. I don't know much about TIG or stick, but I highly recommend MIG welding. It is a very easy way to learn. It's super simple. Basically in here you've got a big spool of wire. You pull the trigger, wire comes out. You connect the ground to whatever piece you're welding, pull the trigger, and you are good to go. And this was a major upgrade from the flux core welder I started with, which was very similar to this, except it used flux cored MIG wire instead of solid wire, which made for really dirty, sputtery welds. You can check out my very first video. I talk a little bit about it there. But the next upgrade from that would be get yourself some gas shielding and use solid wire. This stuff is readily available and it makes for a super clean weld and a lot less time with the wire brush. But this is a great welder. As you can see, it's super small, very lightweight, and it welds up to 3/8 inch thick steel, which is conveniently the thickest I ever get. And at the same time, you can plug it into your regular household outlet or a more powerful outlet. And luckily, my dryer is 220 or 30 or whatever that higher voltage is, just to get a little extra power out of this thing. And of course, I got it on a nifty little cart here. Makes moving it around the shop a lot easier. And I'm sure there's people in the comments that love stick welding that say that that's the best way to go, but I don't really care. From what I've seen, stick welding is really dirty and kind of dumb, where on the opposite side, TIG welding is very precise, great for smaller things, but we're just welding giant hunks of steel together, so I think MIG is the best way to go about it. And like I said, the first one I got was a Hobart for 500 bucks on Amazon and lasted me for years with no problems. Other tools you will definitely need are some good angle grinders. I started with one, now I have three, and that's strictly because there are multiple different types of discs that you're gonna need when it comes to cutting, grinding, and smoothing out steel. And it's just a lot easier to have one disc on each grinder as opposed to swapping them out every 10 minutes. But first one over here is the cutoff wheel. I like to find the thinnest ones possible. These are the ones I use. They cut very clean. I've gone through thousands of these in my lifetime, and I got shot in the eye by one just a couple weeks ago. Felt great. Number two, second most used, is the flap disc. This is simply enough, just a sandpaper wheel. What is this, 40 grit? And that's for smoothing out welds, rounding off corners, and just making everything look pretty. If you're really bad at welding like me, you're gonna use a lot of these. And then over here on the electric one, I've just got a wire brush wheel. Again, great for removing BBs and just kind of cleaning up your work. The electric one works great, but it's definitely not as powerful as the plug-in ones, but I don't need as much power when I'm using this guy. Also, I have nightmares about grabbing this thing and turning it on. Sorry, I don't know why I told you that. And like I said, for years, all I had was a small welder and one or two angle grinders, and the biggest upgrade I made was getting a nice metal chop saw like this. This thing is a game changer when it comes to cutting tube and pipe and rod. You can put this at a nice 45, get some really good miters that way. And it's just so much more quick and precise than trying to cut things straight with the old angle grinder here. Not necessary, but I highly recommend it. Moving down the line, you're gonna need some basic equipment, you know, some good pliers, a tape measure. This thing is pretty handy. This is a roll-up tape measure, so when we're drawing the doors, we're gonna be busting this out. Very convenient as opposed to just bending a big straight ruler. But having a big straight ruler is good to have around for drawing doors and things like that. Obviously, you're gonna need some sort of writing utensil. This is a welder's pen, works great. I like the red dye for this because it shows up. Right now I've got a gray one in there, and it's really hard to draw on gray steel. Next up, you're gonna want everything to be as square and plumb and level as possible. So a good level, a nice square for making the frame. These things are invaluable for marking square tubes straight as well. And the magnetic ones are very handy when it comes to making the frame. And again, just making sure that everything is as level and perfect as possible. Other various tools, a good wire brush for cleaning up welds, a lot of clamps come in handy, just for mounting brackets and things like that. And then on the safety side of things, earmuffs, gloves. These ones are not the most protective. These are like goat skin, really thin, but I like to be pretty dexterous when I'm working, but some thicker gloves are really nice, especially if you have a welding heavy day. I probably should have brought mine out here. I sell them on my website. You'll see them at some point. Safety glasses, I don't use them as much as I should, but I'm gonna try real hard because you don't want to shoot a piece of steel into your eye. Done it! And then of course you got to get yourself a welding helmet. The auto dim ones are ideal. And when I was trying to teach myself how to weld, the hardest part was knowing the names of everything, especially in the steel world. I would go to a shop and be like, I'm looking for that piece that looks like an L, and they'd be like, angle iron, you idiot. And I'm like, yep, sorry. So now we're gonna go over some of the basic things that we're gonna use during this build. Starting over here with the aforementioned angle iron. This is what I build all the grates out of. Sometimes I use the wider stuff for holding the grates in, that way you have a little bit more wiggle room. And this stuff is super convenient, you know? On this pit right here, that's what I built the backstop out of. Again, that's what the grates are made out of, and that's what holds the grates in. Very handy stuff. Next up, this is flat bar. This is actually some 3/16 inch flat bar, which is thicker than I usually have, but I usually prefer 1¼ inch 11 gauge, which is 1/8 of an inch thick flat bar. And that is primarily for right here, your door banding. And it comes in handy for all sorts of projects. And then next up we got square tube. This is 1.5 inch 14 gauge square tube. That's what I like to use for making most of my frames, but you could also go thinner. This is some 1-inch tube on this Chud table over here. Depends on what you're doing. You can also go thicker if you want a beefier look. And there's various other pieces you're gonna need, like some 1/4 inch rod or some 120 DOM tube, or this 3/4 tube right here. That's how we make the handles and the hinges, things like that. And of course, then there's steel. Usually whenever I'm building a pit, I'll just go to the metal shop and ask for your standard hot rolled steel. But if you really want to step your game up, like I've been doing recently, you can get yourself some pickled and oiled P&O steel, which is just so much cleaner. As you can see, this is some really clean metal. My table is made out of hot roll, and it's basically still got that mill scale on it, which is some pretty dirty stuff. It's really hard to get a clean weld through, and it just doesn't look as nice. But this P&O steel is definitely a lot more expensive. As far as thickness goes, it really depends on your budget, but you can also kind of work smarter cover and work around it, you know, because this is a double insulated firebox that we'll be talking about in a little bit. I make this whole thing out of 3/16 and it works out perfectly. As you can see, it's plenty thick. The door, this is 1/4 inch, and that's usually about as thick as you're ever gonna need to get when it comes to fabricating smokers. That being said though, I am gonna make the cook chamber out of 3/8. That's that pipe right there, but that's just because I found it at a pipe yard for way cheaper than it would be than to roll a 1/4 inch pipe like I do for these. And of course, in the welding world, just like anything else, there is plenty of luxuries that you could have, like plasma cutters, acetylene torches. I actually do have an acetylene torch. We'll probably bust that out when it comes time to make hinges. And if you saw my last table build video, I did just get myself a fixture table back here from Langmuir Systems. That thing is awesome. It just makes life a little bit easier, but like I've said 1,000 times now, all you really need is an angle grinder and a cheap welder. Especially if you're just doing a one-off, you can borrow those tools, spend all your money on the metal. I think that pit in the backyard I built for $600, but that was pre-COVID when steel was a little bit less expensive. But really when it comes to welding, just like any other hobby, start small with exactly what you need and you can build up over time. I have a gigantic air compressor tank right there that I bought a while back along with a plasma cutter, but I underestimated how much it's gonna cost to pump the proper electricity into this garage. So there it sits, unfortunately. So if there's any electricians out there, hit me up. Frickin' $6,000 for 4 outlets. I'll stick with the angle grinder. All right, y'all, that is it for episode 1. I thought we'd start out real basic with a nice intro to welding, all the tools I'm gonna be using throughout this build, just so I don't have to be explaining things as much during the next few episodes. But starting next week, we're gonna get into a lot more welding, a lot more action. It's gonna be a lot more fun. And I'm sure I'll go over a lot of things that I forgot to mention now. So be sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for the entire building process. I think it's gonna be a really cool series. And at the end of the day, we're gonna be cooking some briskets and ribs and all sorts of good stuff on a reverse flow smoker, which I'm pumped about because I've never cooked on one. But that being said, if you enjoyed this video, let me know by hitting that subscribe button. Let YouTube know by dropping a like on this video. Be sure to stick around for the next few videos where we're going to actually start welding and cutting, getting some sparks flying probably right into my beard. Big shout out to all the Patreon members. Thank you for supporting Team Chud and allowing me to keep making all these videos. And until the next time I see you, please go cook something outside. Peace!